I think restaking is a great idea, and in fact, I went as far as suggesting to somebody from an L1 that a key differentiator they could have was, before doing too much stuff, ensure that restaking is a native primitive, right?
Yes.
But
That
I mean, that's
so
like,
that exactly, right? Like restaking is a great idea. Where does it make sense? In protocol by
yeah,
default, without
it,
like any additional fee structures or tokens. Like
it
if Eigenlayer was not Eigenlayer, but it was instead something built into the Ethereum mainnet, Ethereum Foundation basically doing it, then all of it makes so much more sense. And we're back once again, the most optimistic crypto podcast on the planet. We've been recording, which is good. We're back on our
yes,
regular cadence, which
or random
obviously,
regular cadence, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like, just quickly, it wasn't in our notes, but I thought we could touch a little bit on markets and what do you think is happening. Markets have been going down here for a little while. Apparently, there were some pretty big liquidations, some other stuff. What's happening?
I feel kind of becoming the market guy, which I find worrying. Then
You are the
I,
market
I,
guy.
I think we went into this over the last time. I mean, we had basically 7 up months in a row, that like literally 7 up months without a single, even like a relatively flat period on Bitcoin. So it's not exactly surprising that there's a small pullback. I mean, even if we look at things historically, there's the old sell in May and walk away, because markets tend to underperform. At the very least, the stock market tends to underperform from May to October or thereabouts. So it's, this is hardly an issue. I mean, we've gone down what, Bitcoin has been down like 15-20% or something. That's nothing. That's a bad day when an exchange has a problem, right? Related, however, did you see the beat on, because this probably hit Ethereum harder? Did you see the bit that Consensus basically filed pretty much what's a sworn statement regarding other things, but where it mentions on passing, like, oh, by the way, the SEC has privately considered Ethereum a security since, like, I don't know, 2 years ago or something like that. Did you see that?
You mean in there when they sued the SEC, or?
Sworn court declaration basically mentioned that the SEC has considered Ethereum a security for a while, even though they haven't necessarily made that an outright public statement before the recent noises, let's say. So that probably threw a wet blanket on the whole, Ethereum ETF is going to follow on the heels of the Bitcoin ETF that were getting people exceedingly hopeful for a continued up-only rotation. So I would imagine that didn't help either.
Yeah, but I think Hong Kong greenlighted an Ethereum ETF just now. I at least
Oh,
saw a
nice.
headline. So I think that this is the classic the classic game theory of geopolitics playing out in real time, which is always fun. But yeah, I
Also,
mean, I don't. I'm assuming the SEC thinks everything is a security, and like. But one thing that has been interesting following this SEC stuff is that the, they seem to be losing a lot, like a lot more than I thought.
if you lose against Ripple, that's not good, right? That's like going against Al Capone, where you have videos of him blowing up a kid on a little mom and pop corner drugstore, and him confessing to it and still losing. That doesn't speak very well to their lawyers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that. So in some ways, I feel like the SEC lawsuits are like a reflection of the sentiment in some sense towards blockchains and crypto. And based on these, I would say that the sentiment is much more positive than it would have been, let's say, 6 years ago. It's like much, much more. Back in those days, I don't think anybody would have give a shit if they just sent some crypto people to jail, whatever the reason. So that's positive.
You mean that the lawsuit's existence is a reflection of the sentiment, or that the lawsuit results is a reflection of the sentiment? It seems like
The
the
results.
latter. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily argue with that. It's hard to say. I would say I have a slightly different read on this, because it's not like these things are trial by jury, right? As far as I know.
Well, that's partially why, right? Like a judge has a lot of leeway in interpreting these things, and the fact that the judges tend to be coming down like not necessarily against the SEC, but like more in that direction pretty consistently.
But
is a
that's why I would
reflection of
not.
sentiment in my mind.
But that's why I would not see him as a reflection of like general sentiment about crypto. It might be more of a case about lawyers being better informed, or the SEC just doing a terrible fucking case when they do things. Because I wouldn't expect necessarily a random judge reviewing one of these cases to be influenced by global popular sentiment. I honestly, this might be my own bias for these
So
things.
maybe not the sentiment of the people directly, maybe just the sentiment of the people in power.
The SEC is the government, so if I don't
One
think
part of
like
it.
this, sure, but I don't, but at the very least, it's part of the executive, which are the people in power, and in theory, there's a separation between the judicial and the executive. Again, this is my bias, because I'm not entirely impressed by the way that they have gone about things. I was reading this more of an issue of basically competence. This character has, I mean, I've mentioned in the past that I just feel he's showboating, trying to get himself a Secretary of the Treasury position for the next administration, and probably on his greed he has overreached, and then they're just not doing a good enough job of preparing for these things. Because again, if anyone was going to have an easy time coming down on something, it must have been Ripple. And there were so many sketchy details on that the fact that they couldn't even get Ripple through the door is just silly. That just has to be they're just fumbling.
Yeah, I would imagine that a lot of these results would have been quite a surprise. Like surely they thought Ripple was a layup.
I thought Ripple was a layup.
You'd think, huh?
Yeah, and which is also I find weird that they seem to be going against Ethereum. If you can't get Ripple, like you're gonna have a hard time getting pretty much anyone else.
Yeah. In other news, I learned some new stuff about Filecoin today, which I thought you might enjoy. So, Filecoin has a lot of miners in China, right? And apparently, these miners typically do not onboard new data over the network. They onboard new data manually via
Wait, what?
physically shipping hard drives.
So like, well, was it kind of like Amazon's Noble? I think it was, where basically you just shipped
So
big ass multi-terabyte drive.
yeah, so apparently it's hard to get like a serious bandwidth connection to the rest of the world from China. And there's a lot of like bureaucracy and all kinds of liability that comes with it. And so to avoid that, they just don't onboard new data over the network. They onboard it manually.
Where do they get this data from? I'm curious.
I would imagine that someone in another country
Ships them a hard drive.
puts the Filecoin whatever thing onto a hard drive and then takes it to China.
No, this data is not clear text, is it? I guess
It
it's
can,
I
it
guess
can
it's
be,
Falcon. It could be anywhere. Yeah, it could be anything.
can be. But whatever it is, like you just grab the whole DB and take it. But I
Sure,
thought this was
sure.
quite funny.
It is. I'm just wondering who ships hard drives full of data to China from, I don't know, London, let's say.
I mean, now that I know, I kind of want to do it just for fun.
Why?
It just like what are you doing? Oh, I'm just sending.
Oh,
Crypto is this like is Web3 totally new, improved. That's why I'm sending these hard drives on a boat to China
I'm
like
gonna
it's
ship
fucking internet.
I'm gonna ship a hard drive full of articles about Taiwanese independence and Tiananmen Square videos to this in clear text to this poor miner in China just to fuck with people.
Yeah, and then another thing was that apparently the Chinese authorities are arresting crypto entrepreneurs and miners and stuff, and confiscating like all their assets and liquidating. Like Filecoin is expected to, the capacity is expected to decrease considerably. I think like the biggest DeFi protocol on Filecoin now, like the founder was arrested, all his tokens were confiscated. So yeah, stuff happening. It, I don't know what, like I feel like this is like the classic thing, and my memories of this maybe muddled. So like this is maybe not the truth at all, but I have this like general feeling inside that every bear market, China gets like much more positive on crypto, and then the bull market they start arresting things and batting people and all kinds of crap, and, like it's
China's
surprisingly
one.
consistent.
China is one of those countries that has historically been very bipolar, right? The mainland, at least. Like oh yeah, we're pro crypto entrepreneurs. Like, oh no, we're gonna ban all miners. Fuck you. Like, oh no, but we do want this thing. But oh no, not anymore. Bugger off. It's at one point
But
it made
but
sense as
maybe
a.
but maybe it's a full on strategy. It's just like, oh, it's a bear market. Okay, like let's let people do stuff, and then once these people are sitting on a few hundred million, then we'll roll in and take it.
Okay,
you know,
okay, I see. You
the bull
basically think that
market
this
raid.
is. Yeah. You think that this is kind of like crop. They're basically collecting their crops up to a point.
Yes, exactly. It- and like if you think that they have like this aversion to tall poppy, there's the whole tall poppy syndrome, which is often talked about in relation to China. Like crypto is like is the most aggressively fluctuating size poppy in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so like you very suddenly get a lot of tall poppies, and you need to go cut them down.
Yeah, I always thought I always interpreted this in two ways actually. One of them was that they were worried about capital flight, and that's why they basically started coming down Bitcoin and other things when that got too much prominence, because that seemed to be one of the concerns. But the other one was basically that the Chinese government seems to historically have been very governmentable, very very worried about internal stability. So anything that can kind of like introduce a little bit of societal uncertainty, they tend to come down on. I would actually imagine that that is more likely to happen. No, you're right. This is more likely to happen as you get crazy on the top of the bull market as well, because then people start coming in late and then lose everything, and this introduces stability and stability. So yeah, that might be it.
Yeah. The other thing relating to Filecoin that I was just thinking about in general was like, I wonder what Filecoin's answer to AO computer will be. And
Interesting.
by the way, one thing I want to clear up, it seems to me like AO computer will function on something like subnets. So there will be I think Sam said it was a proof of authority thing initially, maybe proof of stake later on, which is like the ordering of the messages and things like that. Like we can come back to Filecoin in a second, but like what do you think about that? Because
I
yeah,
am at a disadvantage there because I've looked at the AO programming model more than I've looked at building things in Filecoin, so it's hard to
But
say.
just let's just focus on AO a little bit. Like new networks to handle ordering of messages feels weird. Like feels like complexity that shouldn't be needed, doesn't it?
Okay, take a step back. Explain to me exactly what you mean by this, because it does seem that program on AO should be, first of all, the messages that you get in AO are going to be atomic up to a point. You're not going to get, say, AO doesn't have the artificial limitations that, for instance, Solana does, where you need to slice things up into UDP packet size chunks. So on AO, whatever you get as a message is the thing that you're supposed to be working on. So is your thing that what happens if two of these messages show up out of order? Is that what you're pointing out?
Well, I'm more asking because I'm a little bit unclear, and Sam didn't go into a huge amount of detail. Somewhere, for some reason, there's a proof of authority network, which is a permissioned network, essentially. And what I'm interested in is why. But that might, in my mind, that might be related to what you were saying, which is that Arweave doesn't have strict ordering, and they maybe need it for this. I mean, they do need it for this.
I'm not sure about strict ordering. I mean, your application should be prepared to handle messages that arrived on any arbitrary order, right? You can't rely on, if what you're building this, because Sam seems to be going from how he has described this, is the same mentality as distributed systems, as architecturally distributed systems. And if you are building an architecturally distributed systems, then you can't rely on any particular message ordering. You need to be able to deal with this yourself. Say, if a message happens to require something else that happened before it, that message should include a reference to that requirement, not just show up and assume that the other thing is going to arrive beforehand. So this this seems to be something that your application should be able to manage, right? If you're building anything simpler than a chat application, let's say, anything more complex, I'm sorry, than a chat application.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that like you should locally be able to have like the message log or whatever that can do this. It shouldn't need an external system.
Not exactly. I do imagine that on the system design, you do want to maximize the chance that messages arrive in an order that is close to the order in which they were sent. What I'm saying is that your application shouldn't necessarily be designed with the assumption that that is the case, because you don't control the network at the very least.
Could it be relating to the fact that there are some messages which, like, in order for it to be useful for some use cases, you can't simply rely on local state, and you need some consensus on global state in order to in order for the local instances to be able to kind of operate.
But wouldn't that be an issue of at the moment that you receive a message that requires external data, then you retrieve it, given that you are a self-contained process that has no particular execution time limits?
Well, let's just take a simple example. So you have an exchange, and people, I make a trade. Whatever, like you need some source of truth for state, right?
Yes.
And that can't just be. It can't just live with me locally.
Yes.
And so it would either need to be replicated in a lot of places, and those nodes need to come to consensus, or you have one trusted party, or something like that.
Well, in the case of the exchange, I would imagine that you have trusted party, let's say a feed that comes authenticated with a particular key that you say, yes, I trust the message assigned with this key. You would, assuming that an exchange, for instance, what you get is, say, the mark price for a particular asset, right? You need to know how old that message is, the last message that you got from the outside world with the mark price. And you need to be able to make a decision on, has this been updated recently enough? But that still seems like a local decision, even though it is relying on external data. Right. And if you, I don't know, let's say that you get an Oracle update for slot 100. And as far as you're concerned, you are now on slot 150. You know that you maybe don't, that you need, that you know that you need, maybe need to treat that datum differently that you would a more recent datum. So
But
what's
that,
the,
but that's a trusted party, right? Like an Oracle.
there's a, yes, in the case of the exchange would be a trusted party. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to understand like where that need comes from, and that I guess is probably where it comes from.
Uh, what I would imagine right now is that the message passing itself is not implemented in a permissionless manner. That's what I would expect is the case right now. That's because that's all it says, right? A proof of authority style message passing service. So if you, going back to how I
Can you
described,
just put the messages into Arweave, and that would be permissionless?
okay, actually you are putting the messages into Arweave, right? The thing is, how do you know that a message is in Arweave? In order to retrieve anything from Arweave or from anything else, you're going to need a content address of some sort, right? Therefore, you're going to need some sort of service that probably knows which messages have gone in, and if somebody queries a message for a particular source, then that sends it back. This is what I would imagine that they have.
So scanning Arweave is not practical.
How would you, again, and everything is content addressed, so how would you scan Arweave for a particular type of message? Seems to be like a completely brute force thing of everything that's going into the, well, into what is already a multi-terabyte weave. So going back to the analogy that I originally made for this, which this, like AO strikes me as you basically have a whole bunch of Erlang processes distributed all over the place, communicating over something like RabbitMQ for message passing. The RabbitMQ part, the thing that identifies, yes, this piece of content is a message and it needs to go to that particular subscriber, that seems to be the thing that they're referring to here.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I still don't quite understand the architecture of AO computer. I need to do some more research. But I was surprised by that. But that makes sense if you can't easily like watch for some specific message, then you need some other way of delivery.
Yeah. You basically would need to watch every message, as far as I know. You need to watch every content, every bit of content going to the network. I can't think of any other way, given that Arweave is a completely arbitrary storage mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah. But well, again, moving on to Filecoin, like I think Filecoin eventually needs to respond in some way, right? And so it's interesting to think about how that might happen. My feeling is that Filecoin should probably go ZK for this, because so my one big issue with AO computer, it's not really an issue, but it's sort of like an opportunity size question, is that I don't think people want to do things locally by and large. Now, obviously, AO computer doesn't require that. You can do whatever you want, but it's also not designed with the expectation in mind that like most of the usage will happen through proxies
Are
in
you
some way.
sure? because as far as I can tell, every usage you can do right now is happening to a proxy. Like anything I can do on AOS locally, AOS locally seems to be a dumb terminal, effectively. Anything I want to do, even requesting a value for a variable that I have set and assigned myself, creates a message and retrieves that from a compute unit somewhere. So everything actually does seem to be running remotely.
Okay. What I think they're missing the opportunity on is how those compute units provide guarantees.
That I agree with.
And that, I think, is the opportunity that Filecoin has, is to essentially lean into ZK. I mean, Filecoin was the first one to go into ZK pretty much in general, and I think it would make a lot of sense here. Like, you can grab, Risk Zero or SP1 or one of these generic ZK VMs out of the box and use that. And I think that gives you like a very natural and verifiable way to offload compute to what ultimately, like, if this stuff, if people end up building a whole new internet on top of these things, like they're not going to be running on people's laptops. Like these will be massive clusters. The equivalent, these, like, a compute unit will be a massive cluster somewhere doing a whole bunch of stuff, and so you would want some verifiability on that. And in the blockchain space, it already makes sense. Like, there's overhead, but the overhead for ZK is lower than re-execution. So like you essentially, in the blockchain case, it really doesn't make much sense to do anything else besides just full on trust, which for blockchain reasons doesn't make sense, or ZK. And so I feel like Filecoin has an opportunity to kind of like do something here. I hope they see AO Computer for what it is, which is like a genuine risk that Filecoin's original vision is just like multiple steps are overtaken by Arweave. I mean, Arweave already kind of front ran them to market on the storage, right? And fair enough, Filecoin came in a little bit behind and whatever, but that can't continue indefinitely while sort of maintaining a position of superiority. Or not superiority, but like even being like, like you're just not gonna win if you're 5 years behind.
Yeah, Lindy only takes you so far in this case, and I do think that Filecoin has the advantage of mindshare in general. There were two issues originally with Arweave, I think. The first one is that I'm not sure if they weren't particularly good at promoting it, or then they were just extremely engineering focused and then not explain its advantages in a way that it actually grabbed most people's attention. Whereas I think that Juan did very well with Filecoin is that he almost didn't talk about Filecoin, he talked about other things, and this brought attention to Filecoin, right? I think that was like a really good approach.
But Juan also had the reputation of being one of the early thinkers in decentralized systems, period, which,
No, I absolutely agree that as well. And again, I'm not. If anything, I'm putting it on him. He was really good at talking about this and at getting attention for the concept as a whole. So that was one issue. Now, the second thing was that originally, well, much like Filecoin as well, Arweave wasn't necessarily programmable. I think that came in 2020 or thereabouts when they launched their smart contract thing. And that had some peculiarities as well. It was effectively just a JavaScript application that, okay, Arweave, basically anything that needs to deal with your data is going to require access to your key, meaning that any application that's running locally needs access to that key, not just you sending messages for it. That was the approach at the time. This AO thing actually, so anyway, that was kind of like a wonky approach, even for it was weird for crypto people and it was weird for non-crypto people, I think.
Yeah, it was just weird.
Yeah, whereas this approach is perfectly, this approach, the AOS approach, should be perfectly familiar for people who have built distributed systems, even if they haven't touched crypto in their lives. So it'll be interesting to see if they can lean into that and make this significantly popular, because it will have the advantage that they would appeal to a whole class of developers that Filecoin doesn't necessarily appeal to, because with Filecoin you still do need the crypto mindset on the current approach.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean Filecoin went much more into the blockchain sort of side of things, like EVM and WASM,
Yeah.
and so on. So yeah, I'm. It's gonna be interesting, like, because there's a valid argument, I think, to be made that it's, and I mean this is the argument that they've been making the whole time in some sense, but like it's possible that the whole architecture of blockchains is kind of wrong for what we're trying to do. Like it's possible that it should look more like a traditional software stack where you have like file storage and DB and then whatever compute and so on. And so I think like on the other hand, I think it's not clear whether that's the case. Like it sort of intuitively makes sense, but at the same time, neither Filecoin or Arweave has gotten anywhere near the kind of traction you might sort of expect. And I think part of it is that neither of them had easy ways to make money, which is kind of a good thing, but kind of a bad thing. Like they just weren't set up for people flipping, NFTs, or like they're real use case oriented, which in some ways harms them, which is a funny dynamic.
I wouldn't say necessarily that's just the case. It's not just that they're use case oriented. It's just that they are use case oriented in a space in which non-crypto developers already have an alternative, and they don't necessarily understand why this one. Like, why should I be using this thing, right? There are, if you are, I don't know, suppose that Aave already exists, and if you want to build something that takes advantage of the existing liquidity, you have a very good reason to go to Ethereum and build it, because you have Aave, you have Uniswap, you can plug into all these things, right? Even if you're not a crypto developer, there are things that you're going to be able to do that you're not able to do elsewhere. On something like Arweave, right, there's the anti-censorability, and then there's the data permanence, but this has particular uses that are not necessarily going to, it's not the first thing that an average developer who needs storage is going to think of. Basically, this is going to be, it is going to apply for people on a very narrow spectrum. So it wasn't just the fact there was no way to make money. I think it was that it didn't enable people to create applications that they couldn't create elsewhere in a more familiar way. Let's not say necessarily in a simpler way, but in a more familiar way. Whereas AOS solves that problem, I think.
Yeah, potentially. Okay, another topic I wanted to discuss quickly. So Eigenlayer put out some plans for their token. I haven't gone through them in detail. I've read some commentary, but one thing that strikes me about Eigenlayer in general and their token plans and just this sort of overall dynamics of that system is that they seem to believe in general that people will not necessarily want to do their own tokens. So this applies to, I think, restaking as a concept, right?
Yeah.
If people are staking ETH in the Eigenlayer case, what is the use case for your own token? You can argue some things, whatever, like governance, something, or you can do dual staking because, you know, adding incredible amounts of complexity equals profit. But it reminds me very much of the early days of Ethereum when people kind of thought that everyone would just use ETH. Like, it's so much easier to just use ETH. Everyone's UX will be so much better. Like, everything will be nice. And then, of course, that didn't happen at all. Everyone did their own token. And back then, like, literally everyone, like, the early days of Ethereum, it was like, oh, you want to use my dApp? You need to have my token. You know, like, we're closer to sort of ETH global currency in the Ethereum ecosystem now than we were then. Like, there's at least rollups now that do offer ETH as the kind of native unit of account. But I think expecting that is always a mistake. And I kind of feel like that is happening here. And I'm quite confused, to be honest.
By
Like,
the fact that they keep thinking that, or by what?
well, because so I think that they don't think that. I think they're smart enough people, right? Like, they know, like, if you look at the list of projects that are doing AVS, they're all doing a token. 100% of
Yeah.
them. In fact, the fact that they are working with Eigenlayer and thus introducing huge amounts of complexity into their application means they're doing a token. Like, that's and so if that's the case, like, I'm somewhat confused as to, like, what the end game is for Eigenlayer, because it seems like a sort of like they have kind of two options. They can try to force their token into things, force ETH into things, in which case someone will fork, you know, within minutes,
Yeah.
or not. And then what is their token for? You know, like, so they will have some leverage over these projects, and, you know, you could imagine that if they're able to capture fees, it could just be a governance token for the treasury, or, like, you know, these types of things. But they don't feel like 500 million in funding things.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time disagreeing with you on that, mostly because I think the last time we discussed restaking, that was precisely my position, that I think restaking is a great idea, and in fact I went as far as suggesting to somebody from an L1 that a key differentiator they could have was, before doing too much stuff, ensure that restaking is a native primitive, right?
Yes.
But
That
I mean, that's
so
like,
that exactly, right? Like, restaking is a great idea. Where does it make sense? In protocol, by
yeah,
default, without,
it,
you know, like, any additional fee structures or tokens. Like, if
it
Eigenlayer was not Eigenlayer, but it was instead something built into the Ethereum mainnet, you know, Ethereum Foundation basically doing it, then all of it makes so much more sense.
yeah, absolutely. This is, and this is what I told them, and the
And then
fact
you
that
also
something,
don't need to try and push any kind of, like, weird dual staking bullshit. Like, you just have the projects have their own token. You can stake your, like, I mean, you need dual staking anyway. They're going to do their tokens anyway, but at least you don't have another token you need to try to capture value from that equation. Like, there is a problem in general with, so if you build on Eigenlayer and you're not okay being completely permissioned, for example, you need to implement a consensus protocol or a consensus system that takes into account the fact that some stakers have different currency at stake than others.
yeah,
You can, so there's complexity there. You probably need to have your staking table, as in, like, who has staked how much, like, based on you know who's in, like, an active validator on Ethereum as a smart contract, which starts to sound a lot like Polygon proof of stake. their original thing was, they
Yeah.
said they were an L2, and actually they just used Ethereum smart contracts to handle their proof of stake system. And like that's like an insane amount of complexity. So the other option is to not do any of that and just have people restake, run some software, and then
Yeah,
like there's no permissionless really element to it.
no,
And last point is, you don't actually know the risk profile of the restakers you have. So like, how do you even judge the economic security delta between your native stakers and Eigenlayer restakers? Like, that's yeah. Anyway,
look, I'm not gonna second guess why people put money on things at a certain valuation. I would say that if I were Eigenlayer and I were trying to raise another round anytime soon, my argument as to why people are still issuing their own token would probably be something around the lines of, it's going to take a while for the paradigm to shift fully to restaking. We're not talking about a 2-year thing. We're talking about 10 years. Maybe the investors are betting on that horizon. I just think that so far I have seen generally, like across the board, the incentives are, we are going to give you VC money because we want a share of your tokens, which you then need to increase in value to make us money. It's not going to be, people don't come at this with a mentality of, we're going to invest in you as a working business because we're going to get dividends, right?
Do you know what the biggest return opportunity for Eigenlayer investors is?
Tell me.
New Eigenlayer restaking L1. A chain designed from the ground up only to do restaking.
Yeah.
But it is, right? Like, isn't that insane? Like, like maybe this stuff is enough. It depends, whatever. But I'm just saying, like, if what you're building should be an in protocol thing, and it should be offered natively, it maybe potentially should be considered kind of like first class citizen, right? Like, it should be sort of optimized for it. Then what else can you really do?
Yeah, I'm not going to dissect that whole thing, but yeah. And even if that is the case, it's not going to stop people from going out and rolling their own token and then plugging into this thing as well, just in case, right? I don't know. I do think that the deck is stacked against the possibility of restaking becoming the main way, never mind the sole way, but then becoming the main way that protocols tend to implement their economic security on. I still think that protocols are going to continue offering their own tokens, just because it's really nice to be able to control your own issuance and print your own money, right? So I wonder if there's an analogy here to discuss related to basically what happened with smaller countries, smaller, weaker countries in the EU, and the economy is more your thing than mine. But if you're a country like Romania or Greece and you have your own currency, which Greece no longer does, right? Then you have a certain amount of flexibility over your monetary policy. The moment that you're Greece and you switch to the euro, now you're kind of handcuffed basically by moving in lockstep with anybody else. So I wonder if there's an analogy to be made here to that, where
Ethereum alignment.
even if protocols did not necessarily wanted to print their own money and sell it to people, which I'm pretty sure they do, if they would be concerned by the fact that they don't actually get to control the monetary policy of the thing that provides them security.
Well, yeah. So I mean, this is kind of like what worries me, because look, there's like very good teams building on Eigenlayer, and I'm sure they'll deliver like very cool stuff. I suspect it's going to take a while, but And just want to put that out there. I don't think there's anything wrong with like doing that. Like Eigenlayer conceptually is a great idea. I really like it. I'm more worried about the future dynamics that may result from this. And another thing that concerns me is that a lot of these very good teams, maybe they know something I don't, but they seem to be making a relatively short-term bet.
For
Like it,
example,
so
not that I'm arguing, but if anything,
no,
a
so
particular thing comes to
like
mind.
similar to what you just said, like they don't they're not pricing in that risk of being handcuffed high enough, in my opinion, or maybe at all. And the reason why you might not do that is because you're making a short-term bet, and that so the bet is essentially that
Yeah.
doing this on Eigenlayer means you get big enough, like fast enough, and then you figure it out later. You know, like we don't.
Yeah.
There's like this. You don't need the full roadmap. Like we're just doing this now because this gets us to like this place now, and that's kind of fair enough. Except that this issue is visible, you know. And like if you have your staking table on Ethereum, and if you have dual staking and like whatever, and you've implemented some consensus system from scratch to interact with, like, the amount of work required to make this work is insane. And then like the end state economics don't quite work. Like that's like a weird bet, I think. And so I'm like, you know, somebody said it to me like this, like it's almost like being an Eigenlayer AVS is like this sort of ritual sacrifice you need to make to the Ethereum gods. which which it kind of is.
It's the wearing a suit and tie of Ethereum. Like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but you're supposed to do together in the office.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm curious, like, they are actually like going that route, you know? Like, I thought maybe they were just positioning to sort of seem like they're going that route, and then would do something else.
Okay, let me ask you a
But
question here. How much do you think this is because even teams who were already like on a solid track developing and whatnot got caught by surprise by the fact that things started picking up speed earlier and faster than they expected, and then they were into crazy bull market, gotta get shit out the door, don't think too much mode?
could be it. Could be it. It my worry though is that like you may be able to get shit out, as you put it, with Eigenlayer. It's just not going to be decentralized at all. And maybe that's okay. Like, I mean, the rollups are still centralized. Like, I don't know. I don't know. But it's just, but it like your path to decentralization is a long one.
Do you think that most teams just coming into mainnet right now, let's say the ones that are just launching or have launched in the past year and a half, what percentage of those would you think are actually concerned about decentralization in actual terms, right? Not in the DAO acts as a legal shield sense.
I mean, the DAO doesn't act as a legal shield. The DAO means you
I
have
know, but that's what
essentially
they tell
unlimited
themselves.
liability, which is, I think, is almost the exact opposite of a legal shield.
Sure, but there's a whole approach of the DAO made me do it. It's not me making the decisions. Is the community, right? So how many of this would you think that are actually thinking about decentralization as something that needs to happen, not just as this is a way to justify our token and get people involved?
Well, I mean, but there's a lot of use cases that are being built on Eigenlayer where like the whole thing just doesn't make any sense unless it's decentralized, right? Like the one that comes to, or a couple that come to mind, are like Aligned Layer, which is doing like verification on Eigenlayer, or ZK proof verification. which I think is broadly like a good idea. But if that's not decentralized, then like what, like what's the point? Then you might as well verify on my laptop and just say it's good. It's fine.
Well, you say that as if there is not already at least one protocol that's doing that. Like they're like a verify it as a service, and it's just them. And they were talking about going as turning themselves into a marketplace. But I forget its name. We had discussed it before. So
Yeah, well, but like in an espresso sequencer as a service, like they have implemented their own consensus mechanism, so I have a lot of faith that they can actually do it. But it, including all this like Ethereum L1 stuff, does mean that there's like a fair amount of additional complexity, and I think that needs to be decentralized as well. So like, I'm sure there are like very egregious examples, right? Like there are always, and then that's fine. But I'm a touch confused. Like I would wait a little bit to see how Eigenlayer matures before handcuffing myself to them when they haven't even quite decided what their business model is.
yeah, that's fair.
Especially when it's not necessary, right? So, I mean, conceptually, I would love to borrow security from Ethereum, of course. It's quite possible. Like, for example, there's a project called Ethos in the Cosmos ecosystem, which is basically going to be like the Eigenlayer bridge for Cosmos chains, so that you can just get restaking through that and stuff like that. And there's, even more complexity, whatever. We'll see how it all goes. But like it will be available kind of directly in most stacks. And so then implementing from scratch in the interim feels like a pretty big lift for a pretty immature stack.
Okay, so
One
why
reason why
then?
people might be doing it is maybe because it's like, I'm curious to get your take on this. Like, is it easier to get, a billion in terms of stake by getting restakers, or by just launching your own token and having native staking? Do you see what I mean?
I haven't really looked at the numbers, the percentage of Ethereum being restaked, so I couldn't say. Okay, so first of all, I would say that we have to assume that these people are smart. So let's start from that point of view, right? So if somebody who you assume is smart makes a decision or makes a choice that makes no sense to you, chances are it's because you're not looking at the same goal, right?
Yeah, different assumptions.
Exactly. It is likely that they're just looking at something that I'm not considering at all. Like for instance, they're like integrated with Eigenlayer is the thing to do, right? Like it's like kind of like nobody ever got fired for integrated with Eigenlayer or something like this. It is, as you mentioned, the sacrifice to the Ethereum gods is kind of like the cost to get into the club. That may be a factor. If Eigenlayer has managed to sell it this way, kudos to them, because that seems to be a really good way to go about this business. But can't say if that's it. It could also be a way to claim that you are bootstrapping security even before you have a token, right? This might give you a way to kick the tires on security or staking for your own protocol. That doesn't necessarily mean having a token. There are other ways around that, though. For instance, I mentioned Drift, the DEX on our last call. Drift has insurance vaults for when there are liquidations that liquidators don't handle in time and end up creating some bad debt. The people who are staking dollars to the insurance vaults get a percentage of the fees, and in return they need to pay for some of these liquidations, right? So there are ways of getting economic security without neither your token nor Ethereum. So it doesn't really seem like it's necessarily a way to bootstrap it. Then again, you could be taking advantage of the people who are going to be holding Ether regardless, right? And in the drift case, you assume that people have dollars, and you do want this insurance vote to be in dollars, because whatever bad debt will be dollarized. Maybe that's not the perspective for these cases. I just never been involved on a team that had to make the decision, so I'm just guessing at the mentality.
Yeah, there could all like there's maybe also an argument to be made that like in the DeFi L2 blah 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 kind of ecosystem, the number matters a lot. You know, TVL, whatever it is, matters a lot. Right? You go to L2B, you see the TVLs, you're like, this one's doing well, this one's not doing so well, blah blah blah. Doesn't matter if it's all their native token and it's fictional, but whatever that ranking is, it matters a lot. So there's one way to look at it. And so if the number by itself means a lot and there is not infinite supply, at least yet, of restakers, like there could be scarcity in restakers. And so if you can grab, whatever 2.5 billion worth of restaked ether, then you just get that big number right out of the gate. And you don't have that big number in the same way if you're launching your own token and expecting your own token to kind of underpin your security.
But arguably, you could get the same TVL, assuming that what
You
counts
can, but
is
it requires your token to
no,
do well.
no.
And maybe the rationale is that your token will do well easier if you have the big number in advance.
No, forget your token case. On the drift scenario, for instance, where people commit USDC to these vaults, then if you assume that people are willing to commit a certain amount of capital to you, then in theory, it shouldn't matter if people should make a decision based on how much value versus risk am I willing to put in. And it shouldn't necessarily matter if this value is USDC or Ether. What matters is the actual asset weight that you're putting in.
The whole
So
point of
the on
restaking is that you want to like put in more value than you have in some ways, right?
well, you're recycling value, let's say. But my point is that the only reason that I would see for restaking as opposed to just a USDC vault, let's say, is that you assume that there is more Ethereum, more staked Ethereum availability in the market that there is USDC. That
Yeah.
would be the only scenario in which you would get a higher TVL number.
That might actually be it. That might actually be it. I think that makes sense. So it's not a scarcity thing. It's more that the supply of essentially ether denominated value that people are willing to put up via restaking is just greater than the amount of real dollars they're willing to put up. And that's driven probably largely by the fact that they've already put that money up and they're getting to put it up again.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Well, it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. I think like, this may have sounded a bit negative, but I think restaking will be one of like the dominant narratives going forward. I think it just makes a lot of sense, but we need to figure out a whole bunch of things first, I think. Or like we just need to find the right model to deliver it. And then I think it will become very dominant.
The main reason why I'm positive risk taking as a whole, given that again we have been, it might seem like we have been dissecting the topic for a while and then looking at its guts, but one of the main reasons why I'm positive risk taking as a whole is because it seems almost, other than just taking USDC for stake, it seems like the only way to get access to for protocols to get access to a large pool of capital to secure their things in a way that is mostly uncorrelated with the performance of the protocol itself. Because
Yeah.
you have got to assume that Aave tokens are going to be directly related to the value, to how Aave is doing, and if Aave gets hacked, then the Aave token value is going to plummet, right? So
Yeah.
if this is Ether, it's mostly uncorrelated, and I do think that adds safety basically. So that's why I'm up for it. Otherwise known as the Terra Luna, the back ones.
Yeah, I mean, like in general, I especially when something is potentially really impactful and important, I want to really understand the dynamics that go into that. And I think in this case, it's very clear that we haven't figured them all out yet, and that's kind of exciting. It's also a little bit concerning, like we've discussed, but it means that there's more design space to be explored, and that's always exciting. That's one thing that Eigenlayer did, is it introduced a new thing,
Yeah.
like I'm always super happy when there's a new thing, even if it ends up not working or not working in some specific context or whatever. It's just cool thinking about the implications of new things, and we don't get those that often anymore in crypto. I do need to jump, so thank you everyone for listening to us talk about random things for an hour.
Yeah, it was a fun ramble, and a really uncorrelated ramble, but fun.
Yeah, we tried to be uncorrelated. We aim to surprise more than we aim to please.
Anyway, tata.
Anyway, yes, thank you everyone. Ciao.